The termination letter was still folded in his pocket when Daniel Reyes walked into the small downtown cafe, and by the time he sat down, he had exactly $14 left to his name and a 6-year-old daughter waiting at home who believed her father still had a job. 3 hours earlier, he had been escorted out of the building where he had worked for 8 years, accused of a theft he did not commit, stripped of his badge in front of colleagues who would not meet his eyes. He did not know, as he slid into a worn booth by the window, that the woman sitting alone a few tables away, wrapped in a thin coat and shivering slightly, held the one thing that could save him, the truth. If you believe in stories about second chances, about kindness finding its way back to good people, hit that like button right now, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, share this with someone who needs a little hope today, and subscribe to Humanity Tales so you never miss a story like this one. Daniel had not planned on stopping anywhere. He had planned on going straight home, rehearsing on the drive how he would tell his daughter, Lily, that there would be no new shoes this month, that the birthday party she'd been talking about for weeks might have to wait. But his old car, tired and rattling, had chosen that exact afternoon to die 2 blocks from a cafe he'd passed 100 times and never once entered. Standing on the sidewalk with grease on his hands and nowhere to be that mattered anymore, he'd walked inside simply because his legs would not carry him one more block, and because for the first time in his adult life, he had absolutely nowhere he needed to be. The cafe smelled like bread and cinnamon, warm in a way that felt almost cruel against the cold hollow in his chest. He noticed her before he consciously decided to notice her, an elderly woman near the window, silver-haired, wrapped in a coat that looked expensive but did nothing against the draft leaking through the glass. Her hands trembled slightly around an empty teacup. She kept glancing toward the counter and then away, the particular posture of someone doing math they didn't want to do, someone counting coins they didn't have enough of. Daniel knew that posture. He had been wearing it his entire adult life, ever since his wife passed and left him to raise Lily alone on a salary that never quite stretched far enough, a salary that, as of 3 hours ago, no longer existed at all. He almost looked away. He had $14 and a daughter to feed, and every rational voice in his head told him to keep walking, sit down, order the cheapest thing on the menu, and save the rest. But something about the way the old woman lowered her eyes when the waitress passed her table without stopping, something about the quiet dignity she wore even in what was clearly hunger, cracked something open in him. He thought of his own mother, gone 11 years now, and how she used to say that the measure of a man wasn't what he had, but what he was willing to give away when he had almost nothing left. He walked over before he could talk himself out of it. He didn't make a show of it, he simply asked if he could join her, said he hated eating alone, and when she hesitated, embarrassed, insisting she was fine, he ordered 2 bowls of soup and a basket of bread anyway and told the waitress it was all on one check. The old woman's eyes glistened, and she opened her mouth to protest, but he just smiled and said everyone needed someone to sit with sometimes, and that today, he needed it more than she probably realized. What he did not say was that this soup would leave him $7 for gas money he no longer had a car to use, or that he had no idea how he was going to explain any of this to Lily that night. They talked for nearly an hour. Her name was Eleanor, she told him, and she asked careful questions the way people do when they are used to being lied to, about his work, his family, what had brought him to that cafe on a Tuesday afternoon in the middle of a workday. Daniel found himself telling her everything, the accusation of theft that wasn't his, the security footage that mysteriously never turned up, the manager who seemed almost relieved to have a reason to let him go, the daughter at home who still thought her father was invincible. He told her about his late wife, about the sleepless nights, about how exhausting it was to be brave every single day for a child who needed him whole. Eleanor listened without interrupting, occasionally asking a quiet, precise question, the kind of question, though he didn't notice it then, that a person only asks when they deeply understand how corporations actually work. When the check came, he paid it without hesitation, watching his cushion of safety shrink to almost nothing, and helped Eleanor into a coat that had slipped from her shoulders. She thanked him with a warmth that felt heavier than the words themselves, and as they stood to leave, she asked for his number, saying simply that she liked to keep track of good people. He gave it to her, thinking little of it, assuming it was the kind of thing lonely people say to strangers who show them kindness, never expecting to hear from her again. He walked out into the cold evening, called a friend for a ride, and went home to hold his daughter and pretend, for one more night, that everything was going to be fine. 3 days passed in a blur of job applications and polite rejections, of Lily asking why he was home so much and Daniel inventing gentler and gentler versions of the truth. On the 4th morning, his phone rang from a number he didn't recognize, and a woman's crisp, professional voice asked to speak with Daniel Reyes on behalf of Whitmore Industries. He almost hung up, certain it was a scam, until the voice mentioned a name that made his stomach drop: Eleanor Whitmore, founder and chairwoman of the very corporate group that owned the company that had fired him. The soup, the trembling hands, the coat that couldn't fight off the cold, it had never been about money at all. Eleanor had been in the middle of a private habit few people knew about, one she'd kept for over a decade, dressing plainly, visiting ordinary places unannounced, and watching how strangers treated someone who appeared to have nothing to offer them. She had recognized his company's name the moment he mentioned it, and something about his story, the theft that conveniently surfaced days after he'd raised concerns about discrepancies in his department's inventory reports, had stayed with her long after they said goodbye. She had spent 3 days quietly pulling threads, and what she found chilled her: a mid-level manager falsifying numbers to cover his own mismanagement, and Daniel, the one honest voice who'd flagged it, made into a scapegoat before anyone could ask the right questions. Eleanor did not simply believe Daniel. She verified him, methodically and privately, the way a woman builds an empire, by trusting facts over comfort and people over politics. 2 weeks later, Daniel stood in a conference room on the top floor of a building he used to enter through a side door, watching the manager who had destroyed his reputation be walked out by security instead, his own termination the direct result of Eleanor's quiet, thorough investigation. Daniel wasn't only reinstated, he was moved into a role with more responsibility and a salary that finally let him breathe, offered personally by a woman the board addressed with visible nervousness, the same woman who, weeks earlier, could not afford a second cup of tea. When he thanked her, stammering, still not fully able to process that the stranger from the café was the most powerful person in the building, Eleanor simply told him that she had not given him anything he hadn't already earned by being decent when he thought no one important was watching. That, she said, was exactly the kind of person she had spent her whole career trying to find. If this story touched something in you, if it reminded you that kindness is never wasted even when we can't see where it lands, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who could use a reminder today. Comment below with the word believe if you think good things still find their way back to good people. We read every single one, and it means more than you know. Daniel went home that night and told Lily the truth, the whole truth this time, sitting on the edge of her bed as she listened wide-eyed to a story that sounded like something from one of her fairy tales. He told her that her father had lost his job, and his pride, and very nearly his hope, and that a stranger's soup and an hour of listening had somehow given all of it back. He told her that he hadn't done anything extraordinary that day in the café, he had only refused to let another person eat alone in the cold. And as she fell asleep with a small, satisfied smile on her face, Daniel understood, more clearly than he ever had, that the smallest acts of kindness rarely feel like much in the moment they're given, and yet sometimes, they are the very things that end up saving us.